Grug has been investing diligently. Every spare tooth goes into the market, just as Grug learned in earlier videos. Compound interest doing its work. Portfolio growing steadily. Grug feels good about this. Every tooth working, nothing sitting idle. Then Grug's hunting equipment breaks. Not a small repair, a major break, needing immediate replacement to keep working at all. Cost. A significant chunk of teeth needed right now. Grug looks at his situation. All teeth are invested. Pulling teeth out right now means selling during a sharp downturn. Grug sells at a loss, taking a hit beyond the equipment cost. Grug's neighbor faced a similar failure. Neighbor didn't sell a single investment. Neighbor had a separate pile of teeth set aside. It was in a simple, accessible place, not growing, just there. Neighbor paid for the repair from that pile. Investments untouched. The market downturn was irrelevant to neighbor. Grug initially thought the idle pile was inefficient, but now Grug sees it differently. Today Grug explains the emergency fund, what it actually does, and why doing nothing is, in this case, doing something essential. The core function. An emergency fund prevents you from being forced to make bad financial decisions due to lack of accessible cash. Without an emergency fund, unexpected expenses force a choice. Sell investments, take on high-interest debt, or leave the problem unaddressed. Each forced choice has a cost. Selling in a downturn locks in losses. High-interest debt compounds against you. Delaying makes problems worse. The emergency fund's job is to remove the forced part. It removes the time pressure and the connection to unrelated market factors. Neighbor's idle pile was performing a job, absorbing shocks so the investments didn't have to absorb them in a poorly timed way. Now how much is actually needed? Grug has heard Tribe throw around various numbers. 3 months of expenses, 6 months, a year, without much explanation of where these come from or which applies to whom. Let Grug break down what the number is actually trying to cover. The most common scenario emergency funds are sized around: loss of income and how long it might take to replace that income. If Grug's income stopped tomorrow, job loss, inability to work due to illness, business income disruption. How many months could Grug cover essential expenses before income resumes? This is why the common guidance is expressed in months of expenses, not a fixed teeth amount, because the right size depends on Grug's actual monthly costs, not some universal number. Now, why does the recommended range vary, 3 months versus 6 versus more? Factor 1. Income stability and how quickly it could be replaced. A cave person in a field with abundant similar opportunities, who could likely find comparable work relatively quickly if needed, faces a shorter realistic gap than someone in a highly specialized field with few similar positions, where finding equivalent work might genuinely take much longer. Factor 2. Number of income sources. A household with 2 people earning income has a built-in partial buffer. If one income stops, the other continues, covering at least part of expenses. A household entirely dependent on a single income source has no such buffer. If that source stops, it's a complete stop. Factor 3. Fixed obligations relative to income. Someone with substantial fixed monthly obligations, mortgage, debt payments that can't easily be reduced, has less flexibility to cut expenses during an income gap than someone with more flexible spending that could be reduced quickly if needed. Factor 4. Other safety nets available. In some places and situations, there may be unemployment benefits, family support, or other resources that could supplement an emergency fund during a gap. Where these exist and are realistic to rely on, they reduce how much the personal emergency fund alone needs to cover. Where these don't exist or aren't realistic, the personal fund needs to cover more of the gap alone. Putting this together, someone with very stable, easily replaceable income, dual household income, Low fixed obligations and other safety nets might reasonably target the lower end of common ranges. Someone with specialized, harder-to-replace income, single household income, high fixed obligations, and no other safety nets would reasonably target the higher end or even beyond common ranges. There's no single correct number, but there is a correct process. Think through these factors honestly for your specific situation, rather than picking a number because it's commonly cited. Now, where should this money actually be kept? This matters as much as how much. Grug identifies two failure modes: keeping emergency funds in the wrong place in opposite directions. Failure mode 1. Too inaccessible. If the emergency fund is invested in something that takes time to access, has penalties for early withdrawal, or could itself be down in value at the moment it's needed, it fails at its core job. Grug's earlier mistake, having everything invested, is this failure mode. The fund needs to be accessible quickly, and its value needs to be stable and known, not subject to what did the market do this week. Failure mode 2, too exposed to inflation for too long with no corresponding benefit. If a very large amount sits in something earning minimal returns for years, while inflation steadily erodes its purchasing power, that's a real cost too. This doesn't mean the emergency fund shouldn't exist. It means the size matters. An appropriately sized fund, even earning modest returns, serves its purpose. An oversized fund, sitting in low-yield accounts far beyond what's actually needed for the emergency function, is paying an unnecessary inflation cost for safety that isn't actually being used. The practical answer: a high-yield savings account or equivalent, something that keeps the money easily accessible, with a stable, known value, while earning a reasonable interest rate. Not zero, but also not subject to market fluctuation. This won't outpace inflation the way long-term investments might, and that's fine because that's not this money's job. This money's job is to be there, reliably, when needed, not to grow aggressively. Grug's investment portfolio handles the growth job. The emergency fund handles the stability job. Different jobs, different tools. Now Grug addresses building an emergency fund from zero because for many cave people, this is the actual starting point. And having 3 to 6 months of expenses saved can feel like an impossibly distant goal when starting from nothing. Step 1. Start with a smaller initial target, sometimes called a starter emergency fund. Even a relatively modest amount, enough to cover a single common unexpected expense like Grug's equipment repair, provides meaningful protection. This matters because having zero buffer while working toward a distant goal means even small emergencies force the same bad choices Grug described earlier. A smaller initial buffer, reached quickly, provides real protection sooner. Step 2. Once the starter fund is in place, decide on priority relative to other financial goals. Grug discussed that savings happens automatically, pay yourself first. During this phase, a portion of that savings can be directed here specifically. This isn't necessarily stop investing entirely until the fund is complete. It's a question of allocation. Some cave people prefer to fully prioritize the emergency fund first, especially if starting from a position with no buffer at all. Others prefer to split, some to the fund, some toward investments, especially if there's an employer match, which is effectively free money. Step 3. Once the full target is reached, the automatic contribution can redirect entirely toward other goals. The fund itself, at that point, mostly maintains itself. It doesn't need to keep growing once it's at the appropriate size. Step 4, and this is important. If the emergency fund is used for its intended purpose, it should be rebuilt. Using it is not a failure. It did its job. But replenishing it afterward returns the overall plan to its stable state. The emergency fund's core function is preventing forced financial decisions like selling investments at bad times or taking high-interest debt. The right size depends on income stability, obligations, and safety nets, not a single universal number. The right location prioritizes accessibility and stable value over growth, like a high-yield savings account, not investments. Building from zero can start with a smaller initial target that provides real protection quickly rather than feeling paralyzed. Grug's neighbor's jewel pile wasn't idle. It was the reason the storm that hit Grug's investments never touched neighbor's plans at all. Some teeth work by growing. Some teeth work by simply being there. Grug now has both kinds, and Grug finally understands why both matter. Next video. Grug discovers opportunity cost. Grug finds out every single choice has a second invisible price. Do not miss it.